In the hills west of Arkham, there are dark, narrow valleys with deep woods that have never been cut. The trees slope fantastically, and thin brooklets trickle without ever seeing sunlight. Ancient, rocky farms with moss-coated cottages sit on gentler slopes, but they're all vacant now. Foreigners don't like to live there because of something imagined, not seen or heard. Amy Pierce, an old man with a queer head, is the only one who remains and talks about the strange days. He lives near the open fields and traveled roads around Arkham. There was once a road over the hills, but people stopped using it, and a new road was built. Traces of the old one can still be found amidst the weeds. When I surveyed the area for a new reservoir, people told me the place was evil. I saw the dark woods and slopes for myself and understood why. The trees grew too thickly, and the silence was oppressive. I didn't wonder that foreigners wouldn't stay. But the blasted heath was the worst. It was a gray, desolate area with no vegetation, surrounded by sickly and stunted trees. I felt reluctant to approach it and saw the remains of an old chimney and cellar. I asked old people in Arkham about the blasted heath and the strange days, but they wouldn't give me clear answers. I sought out Amy Pierce, who told me the story of the meteorite and the strange days. His tale was rambling, but I pieced together the scientific points and bridged the gaps. When he finished, I didn't wonder that his mind had snapped or that the folk of Arkham wouldn't speak much of the blasted heath. I hurried back to Boston, unwilling to face the darkness again. The reservoir will soon be built, and the secrets will be safe forever underwater. But I wouldn't like to visit that country by night, especially when the sinister stars are out. In the western woods, a strange event occurred in 1882. A white cloud, string of explosions, and a pillar of smoke appeared, followed by a massive rock falling from the sky and landing at Nahum Gardner's farm. The rock, which glowed faintly, was examined by professors from Miskatonic University, who found it to be soft, magnetic, and luminous. Despite its unusual properties, the rock began to shrink and eventually disappeared, leaving behind only a hollow spherical space. The professors were unable to identify the rock or its origin, concluding it was a piece of the great outside, with properties and laws unlike those on Earth. After the rock's disappearance, Nahum Gardner became a local celebrity, and his farm was visited by reporters from Arkham and Boston. Nahum continued to work on his farm, but the strange event had left a lasting impact on the community. Nahum, a farmer, felt the effects of aging as he worked on his orchard. As the fruit ripened, he was disappointed to find that none of it was edible due to a strange bitterness. He blamed the meteorite that had fallen nearby, which he believed had poisoned the soil. As winter approached, Nahum became worried and taciturn, and his family grew quiet and melancholic. He was concerned about strange footprints in the snow, which he thought didn't quite match the anatomy of the animals that made them. One night, Amy, a friend, saw a rabbit with unusually long leaps, which made him take Nahum's concerns more seriously. The McGregor boys from Meadow Hill found a peculiar woodchuck with altered body proportions and a strange expression. As the snow melted, people noticed that it melted faster around Nahum's house, and strange, oversized skunk cabbages with unusual colors and odors began to grow. The plants' shapes were monstrous, and horses shied away from the area. Professors from the college visited Nahum, but were skeptical of the strange occurrences, attributing them to country superstition. However, one professor later recalled that the skunk cabbage's color was similar to an anomalous band of light shown by the meteor fragment in a spectroscope. As time passed, the Gardner family developed a habit of stealthy listening, and the trees around Nahum's house began to sway ominously in the wind. The family's second son, Thaddeus, swore that the trees swayed even when there was no wind. In April, the vegetation around Nahum's house became even more bizarre, with strange colors and growths. The road past Nahum's house was eventually abandoned due to the unsettling atmosphere. Nahum and his family were prepared for anything, knowing that something was waiting to be heard. The shunning of their house by neighbors affected them deeply, especially Nahum's wife. The boys were frightened by the gossip, and Thaddeus, being especially sensitive, suffered the most. In May, insects came, and Nahum's place became a nightmare of buzzing and crawling. The creatures seemed unusual, and their nocturnal habits contradicted all former experience. The gardeners took to watching at night, waiting for something they couldn't quite explain. In a strange turn of events, a windmill salesman from Bolton stumbled upon a mysterious phenomenon at Nahum's farm. The darkness surrounding the farm seemed less thick, and a dim luminosity emanated from the vegetation. As time passed, the milk from Nahum's cows turned bad, and the grass and leaves began to wither, developing a brittle quality. Amy, the only visitor to the farm, noticed the gardener's physical and mental decline. Mrs. Gardner became mad, screaming about undescribable things in the air, and Nahum eventually locked her in the attic. The horses also became agitated, stamping out of their stalls, and eventually had to be shot due to their unmanageable behavior. As the vegetation continued to turn gray and brittle, the fruit became tasteless, and the insects died. Nahum's oldest son, Zenas, cut down the distorted flowers in the front yard. Amy discovered that the well water was no longer good, but Nahum ignored the warning. Thaddeus went mad after visiting the well, and Nahum locked him in an attic room. The livestock began to die, with poultry turning gray and dying quickly, hogs growing fat and undergoing loathsome changes, and cows shrinking and disintegrating. The dogs ran away, and the cats had left earlier. When Thaddeus died, Nahum buried him in the family plot, and Amy consoled him, but the terror surrounding the Gardners was palpable. In the eerie farmhouse of Nahum Gardner, strange occurrences were happening. Nahum's wife was getting weaker, and his children, Thad and Merwin, had gone missing. Amy, a friend of Nahum's, would visit the farm, but the atmosphere was becoming increasingly unsettling. One night, Merwin disappeared while fetching water from the well, leaving behind a crushed lantern and pail. Nahum was beside himself, and Amy couldn't imagine what was happening. After 2 weeks, Amy visited the farm again, finding Nahum weak and lying on a couch. The room was cold and the fireplace was unlit. Nahum mentioned that Zenas, his son, lived in the well, but Amy couldn't get more information. He searched the attic, finding a dark, stench-filled room with a horrific, crumbling creature in the corner. The creature slowly moved, and Amy felt a malevolent presence. Amy left the attic, locking the door behind him, and began his descent down the stairs. He heard strange noises, including a thud, a scream, and a dragging sound. The woodwork around him glowed with an otherworldly light. Suddenly, his horse outside whinnied and ran away, followed by the sound of a buggy crashing into the well. Amy was left alone, frightened, and unsure of what was happening. Amy visited Nahum's farm, where he found Nahum's body in a horrific state. Nahum's last words revealed that a mysterious force, which he called the color, had taken over the farm, sucking the life out of everything. Nahum believed it came from a stone brought by men from the college and grew in the well water. The color was similar to the flowers and plants that had grown in the spring. Amy fled the farm and notified the authorities in Arkham about the deaths of Nahum and Nabby, as well as the disappearance of Merwin and Zenas. The police, coroner, and medical examiner investigated the farm, finding the bodies of Nahum and Nabby, as well as evidence of the strange ailment that had killed the livestock. As they explored the well, they found the remains of Merwin, Zenas, and several animals. The well water was rank and seemed to be emitting a strange, pulsing glow. As night fell, the men gathered in the sitting room, trying to make sense of the bizarre events. They were stumped, unable to link the strange vegetable conditions, unknown disease, and unaccountable deaths. As they conferred, the coroner noticed a glow emanating from the well, which Amy recognized as the same color Nahum had described. Amy feared the worst, remembering the globule in the meteorite and the crazy vegetation from the spring. In the yard, a strange beam of light emerged from the well, alarming Amy and the others. The horses outside were frantic, and Amy warned the wagon driver not to go out. He recalled Nahum's words about a life-sucking entity from beyond, which grew from a meteor stone and fed on living things. As the light grew stronger, the men saw the trees moving as if jerked by an unseen force, their branches twitching and clawing at the moonlit clouds. 1,000 tiny points of unholy radiance appeared, tipping each bough like fireflies dancing over an accursed marsh. The shaft of phosphorescence from the well poured into the sky, filling the men with a sense of doom. The veterinary and Amy tried to prepare for the worst, but the horses broke free and ran off. The men realized that the strange light was spreading to everything organic around them. Amy reflected on how the entity came from the meteor stone, grew in the well, and fed on the living, including his friends Thad, Murney, Zenas, Nabby, and Nahum. As the column of color flared stronger, Amy's horse hero let out a terrifying sound, and then lay still on the ground. The men knew they had to leave the house, which was now filled with a faint phosphorescence. They fled through the back door, stumbling through the fields to the 10-acre pasture, not daring to look back until they were far away. In the dark of night, Amy and 6 others crossed Chapman's Brook, approaching the Gardner farm. The moon disappeared and they stumbled through the darkness. When they looked back, they saw a terrifying sight. The entire farm was aglow with an otherworldly color, trees and buildings twisted and burning with an eerie fire. The scene was like something from a Fuseli painting. Suddenly, the horror shot into the sky, leaving behind no trail. The men were left staring at the stars, frozen in shock. As they turned to leave, they heard a crackling sound, and a kaleidoscope of unnatural sparks erupted from the farm. The men fled, not daring to look back. When they finally stopped, they realized the horror had vanished, leaving behind only darkness and an unearthly wind that whipped through the fields and woods. Amy was shaken, having seen something that the others didn't, a faint, unearthly color rising from the well. He knew that the horror still lurked down there, and he was forever changed. The next morning, 3 of the men returned to find that everything living had vanished, leaving behind only a desolate, gray wasteland. The well remained, a haunting reminder of the terror that had occurred. The locals whispered of strange occurrences and blights spreading from the area. Some claimed to have seen wild prints in the snow, and horses grew skittish near the spot. The mental influences were said to be bad, driving people mad. Amy never returned to the area, and the narrator was left with a sense of unease, wondering what horrors still lurked in the depths of the well. As I worry about Amy's safety, I remember his encounters with the mysterious force. Its influence is subtle yet powerful. Amy can't seem to escape its grasp. He often recalls Nahum's ominous words. "Can't get away. It draws you. You know something's coming, but it's no use." Amy is a kind old man, and I fear for his well-being. When the reservoir gang starts work, I'll ask the chief engineer to keep a close eye on him. I dread the thought of Amy becoming a twisted, brittle creature, haunting my dreams.